Woo! Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying. Change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm, pouring rain on your season of drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing it?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you riding with True ID. And I'm really excited about the guests we got today, man. I've been doing a lot of guests lately, and this one is going to be another dynamic guy coming in to chop it up with us today. And it's been a while, man. Been a long time coming. Been trying to get him on for a while, and we've been playing phone tag and everything in between. But I'm glad to finally have him. Our guest today is an international speaker, apologist, leadership advisor, and author of a book, Blueprint for Bible Basics. Not to be confused with Jay-Z's Blueprint, I'm sure. We'll ask him about that in a minute, you know. But in addition to that, he also writes the blog entitled Relentless for Pursuit of Purpose. He's the pastor of education at Engaged Community Church. For 15 years, he served both in youth and adult teaching ministries. Our guest has also trained hundreds of teachers and ministers so that they are equipped to deliver lessons in Bible studies, purpose, leadership, and apologetics in order to maximize their effectiveness in and for the kingdom of God. He is a firm believer that everyone is born on purpose with a purpose. And he teaches people all over the world to find the purpose God has placed on the inside of them and to deliver that to the world. He's also the founder of the Proof for the Truth conference, where people can come and learn and understand the evidence for the truth and how to communicate it effectively. So without further ado, false gods and worldviews get destroyed when you're dealing with my boy. It's Alex McElroy. What's going on there, brother?
Hey, how you doing? I'm glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no doubt, man. No doubt. Glad to have you, bro. Glad to have you, man. I'm glad we was finally able to catch up. You know what I'm saying? It's been a little while. I think first became aware of you through Tim Stratton. You know what I'm saying? As a matter of fact, I think he was the first person that hit me with your link or something like that. You know, been trying to get with you for a while, man. Glad we finally caught up with you.
Yeah, me too. Tim's a good guy.
Oh yeah, real good dude, man. Real good dude, man. You know, so tell us about your ministry, man. Tell our audience about who you are, your ministry, and actually how'd you get into apologetics?
So I have the privilege of traveling around the country, teaching and sharing evidence for Christianity. I never decided to go into apologetics, and it's kind of interesting. So we don't have a long enough show to go into my past, but
okay.
I was not always the guy that I am today.
Oh, and, we ain't talking about some criminal. We ain't talking about some R. Kelly stuff, already, bro. I might have cut the show short right quick. We had, hold up now, hold up,
No, nothing like that. Thank God. But I had my run-ins and some other endeavors. But
okay.
I remember when God was pulling me back out of that lifestyle. That my mom would always send me books, and I never read them, of course. And then, once I kind of was coming out of the fog. I was like, let me go check out one of these books she sent me, and the first book I picked out of the box was The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. So I had never heard of the word apologetics. I had never thought about apologetics. I had never even considered the fact that this thing needed to be proven, because I actually did know God from a young age. I just kind of drifted as we tend to do, and when I started reading the book, it just awoke something in me like, man, this is really cool. Like, I never thought about scientific evidence. I never thought about medical evidence and historical and archaeological evidence. It had never really, me personally, I didn't really need it. But what I tell people now is, even if you're not going to be an apologist yourself, it's always good to have more than one tool in your arsenal.
Right.
Because, even preaching on a Sunday, people may never come to a church, and even if they come, they may never make that step and walk on Sunday. That may not be how they get reached. Most of the world's best apologists, in my opinion, they were formerly atheists. They came to faith by examining the evidence or by having a direct experience, and and most of the time it wasn't in a church. So I just think, especially in this day and age, we as believers have to be better at least being junior apologists, to be able to explain as 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, the reason for the hope that is in us. And everybody's not going to be Razi, but that's okay. In fact, no one needs to be. You know, you don't want to be like somebody else, because that goes back to my original purpose, as you read in the bio, that I want everyone to walk in their God-given purpose. That means you have to fully be you in doing whatever you do. But that doesn't mean you can't know the arguments and how to articulate those arguments to bring people into the faith.
Great, man. That's great. You know, let me ask you. You said something a second ago about, you said in this day and time, it's just so important that we have a couple arguments under our belt. Like, you know, just in your experience, you know, traveling around, you know, talking to people, you know, all over the world. What is it about, I guess maybe this cultural climate, or just what is it about the way the world as it is today that makes it different, such that we really have to be equipped in a way that maybe in the past we haven't really had to? Like, you know, what do you think that's about?
Well, you know it full well, the different religions and pseudo religions that pop up that you contend with on a daily, that if anybody just did really a basic study of Christianity, a lot of this stuff would just go away. So Two things. One, statistics show, I was doing a study for some ministers, I think last year, and statistics show that 41% of Christians say they rarely or never read the Bible. That's a problem, because if you are belonging to something and you don't even know what it is you're belonging to, except for whatever the pastor says on Sunday, that's a problem. And it also opens you up to being tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine, as Paul says. So that's one thing. The other thing, and having been in youth ministry now for close to 15 years, the advent of cell phones. So I can have kids come to my youth ministry or whatever, and they can listen to a great lesson, and it'll be truthful. But when I leave, or probably even during the lesson, they're Googling, and they can find 10 different things that directly contradict what you just said. And if one of those things allows them to live a lifestyle that they want to live, they might go with it.
Wow.
But the question at the end of the day is, what is true? And so truth, by definition, is singular. So the other part, to answer your question, is this, I would say, the biggest enemy, not just of Christianity, but really even the people who ascribe to it, it's hurting them too. They just don't realize it, is pluralism. And that it was always there, but now because of the social media and because of the can't we all just get along attitude, everybody is seemingly comfortable, or more comfortable, saying, well, you believe what you believe and we're all going to make it. That may soothe your senses, but that's not true. And it's not true because it's not true because I say it's not true. It's philosophically impossible. Let's say it like this: if 1 + 1 is 2, and 5, and 10, then that is no longer an objective truth. And it's also no longer a truth that you can trust. So truth, by definition, is singular. All truth, objective truth, is exclusive. Thereby, it excludes its opposite. And so to say, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, all roads lead to heaven, that's just categorically impossible. Right. Because they make mutually exclusive statements about each other. So it's not that this is my way and I want to stick up for my way. I'm just saying, at this point, I'm not even saying which one is true. I'm just saying everything can't be true.
Now, all right, so here's the thing. I want to get to our questions, but like you said a couple things that I just can't pass up. I got to engage on a little bit. So, one thing that you said, you've made this distinction between truth. And I guess you said something a minute ago about how one of your youth can be in your class or something like that, leave, and they can Google, find 10 different things that contradict you. And if one of them allows them to live a life that they want to live, then they're going to ride with that. And I just think it really speaks to how, what people are driven by. You know what I'm saying? You can have people who on the surface say that they're interested in the truth and facts and so forth, but really there can be these other motivations that don't necessarily have to do with truth. It could be something of an emotional nature. And it just really made me think about, much of what we talk about in the show having to do with identity. You know, I've had people say to me I mean, on numerous occasions. I mean, it's so many times it's not even funny, but their justification for why they hold to this Afrocentric religion or ideology or spiritual worldview, whatever they want to call it, is that this is what our ancestors did, or this is what's African. Such and such is African, and that's not African. Therefore, I'm going to follow that which is African. And so again, it really their quest for information, or whatever they want to call it, is driven by some emotional motivation that links with identity, as opposed to discovering truth. Full stop. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was having similar conversations, as I tend to do. And it's interesting. That's predominant in the kind of Afrocentric religions. Because when I talk to Muslims and Hindus, even though a lot of that is cultural, it's not as serious in that way for them. Mm-hmm. Although it's more about the culture that they come from. And I get it. I was telling somebody, I get why, especially in America, being African American, you would want to ascribe to something that validates or augments your identity because of the things that our people have been through. So I get it, and I sympathize with it, and I've dealt with my fair share of racism and continue to, but that doesn't make it true. And Ben Shapiro says something, and I don't agree with everything he says, but he says facts don't care about your feelings, and they don't.
Right.
It's like I could cross the street and be like, I feel like I can stop this bus, but you can't. Right. So if it's you or the bus is going to win.
That's right.
So I get it, and I sympathize with it, and I sympathize with why, especially a lot of African Americans would ascribe to those things. But there's something else we got to remember too, and I think even scientists last year traced back all humanity to two people. Which obviously aligns with the Genesis account.
Sure.
And so we got to remember something else. And I don't want to say this to let anybody off the hook for the atrocities that have been committed in the past, but race is a social construct. And so even race itself is not real, and not in an objective way, and not in a way that is singularly defining of a person. Now, because of how race is and how it's been for so long, it has become more real than it is, because African Americans tend to align with certain things just because that's what their ancestors and that's what the people around them align with, and so it becomes normative. But in essence, like if we go down to the genetic level, 0.1% of our genetic makeup goes into making up our external our features. Yeah. And so it doesn't make, if we thought about it like that, it doesn't make sense for me to base my 100% of my worldview on 0.01% of my genetic makeup. Like those numbers don't match up. There's 99.9% of me that is the same as my white brother or sister, or at least has the potential to be the same, but fundamentally. So I get it, and I think I don't really even go into a lot of times trying to debunk everything, because there's so many religions out there, you would never get anything done. So I simply say, once I've proven, let's say 1 + 1 is 2, I don't have to prove 1 + 1 is not 5.
Gotcha.
And so I stick to really, now obviously we answer like Q&A and you have to answer those questions, but if we can prove Christianity is true, then it's true. And if it's true, then nothing else is true. That's just the nature of how truth works.
That's good, man. That's good. Yeah, it's just very interesting. It kind of brings me back to a guy which I know you're familiar with, Frank Turek. I've seen him often ask the question, like when he's in Q&A, he'll ask maybe somebody who's objecting to something that he said, like, if Christianity was true, would you become a Christian? And it seems like such a simple question, but he has a number of people I've seen. I've watched the videos where they're like, nah. So it's like, well, so you're not really interested in the truth here. So why should we go a step further? You see what I'm saying?
I remember I watched one of those last week. I saw the same thing. Right. And it was funny. And like at the end of it, he's like, well, thank you for being honest about saying, and he rephrased it to make the guy really aware of what he just said. And it still didn't really dawn on him. He's like, thank you for being honest about saying that you would not accept the truth even if I accurately present it. Like, that's a weird and a bold statement to make.
Yeah. But, I think it's actually, and this is just something that's kind of, and I'm going to get to our questions in a minute. This has just been a fascinating conversation. But I think maybe sometimes we jump the gun in getting to the information. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes it's good to go. I mean, ultimately we want people to digest the truth. But when we sense that they're not really after truth, maybe it is effective to just make it glaringly clear to them that their own motivations don't, lean toward the discovery of truth. Like, sometimes maybe that's the stone in their shoe that we need to make evident to them. Like, what do you think about that?
I completely agree. And I think for that reason, like, I'm a big believer in discipleship. And so it's hard, for you, what you do and even what I do, even what Frank does, when you go to a conference or when you have a conference and you're speaking and then you answer Q&A, that is often your only interaction with that person. And even if you talk after the event a little bit more, then you fly back home. And so it's hard to really engage in a discipleship relationship with everybody. But as much as possible, I think relational evangelism or relational apologetics or conversational apologetics is the most effective way, because most people aren't going to be convinced just because you answered one question for them. And it's just the nature of what it is. And that's the other reason why all Christians need to get better at this. Because, for example, I was serving with RZIM at the University of Florida last year and engaging with different talks with students on the campus there. And I was there for a week, so I had some time to build with a few kids, but then I'm gone after that week. And so we're very intentional, or RZIM is, I should say, is very intentional about connecting them with the on-campus ministries so they can have ongoing kind of discipleship and connection and opportunities to get their questions answered. And actually a really awesome story, one kid who I engaged with, I won't name him, but he was very obstinate. And after the 1 hour talk, I talked with him for 2 hours. Then he came back for the evening talk, another 1 hour, and then he and I talked for another 3 hours. And that's 7 hours total. He still wasn't convinced. And I gave every evidence, man. We went through all the historical documents and how many documents and why we trust them and how we can know they're accurate and, the scientific. We went through everything. And at the end of that day, I said, look, they're turning off the lights. We got to go home, man. But one of his issues was he didn't like the fact that, okay, if God's so powerful, why does he have to die on a cross? He didn't like that part of it. I said, okay, here's the thing. I don't actually believe I haven't proven the case, but disagreement without alternative is empty. That's one thing Vince Vitale always says. So it's okay to disagree, but you still have to explain the evidence because something did happen. So I said, here's what I need you to do. Since you basically want to tell God how to be God, you don't like how he did it, then go home, come back tomorrow, tell me another way he could have gone and forgiven us of our sins and done it and made sure that justice was served and all the components that occurred. Tell me how all those could have happened without the cross, because you don't like that part. But you cannot disregard grace, justice, or mercy because these three converge at the cross. And he didn't come back the next day. So, but it's only half funny because, as you know, we don't want to win the argument. We want to win the soul.
Right.
So the good news is that was a year ago. I stayed in contact with him because I had his phone number, so I text him periodically. And at the beginning of this year, he had started going to the on-campus ministry last year, and I would ask him periodically, so are you saved yet? Are you saved yet? Just, checking in with him. And he's like, no, I'm learning a lot. And so this year, at the beginning of the year, I texted him, and I was like, so are you Christian yet? He said, yes. And I was like, well, I did a double take on my phone. I was like, wait, let me make sure I read this right. So I called him because I was like, okay, I need to make sure that he actually understands what I'm saying, that he's confessed, he believes, and it's confirmed, man. And so It took a year, though. It took a year, and it wasn't just me. There's other people he was talking to on that campus. Sure. And so we have to remember as believers, we can't save anybody.
That's right.
Even you can have the best answers in the world, but you can't save. All you can do is get somebody one step closer. So, I tell people, take the pressure off of you. If you don't know, if you don't know the answer to every question, that's okay. If you're not Frank Turek, that's okay. But there's no excuse for any of us to lack information, because this is the most information-rich age ever on the planet Earth.
Sure.
So, we got Kindle on our phones. You can go on the internet. You can go on YouTube. Like, there's no reason for us not to know more. And so this is my frustration with Christians, because we are, especially in the West, becoming more biblically illiterate instead of the other way, and that doesn't make any sense.
Right. Man, so we're about we're about 20, 25 minutes in, and I'm just now getting to the questions, you know what I'm saying, that I have for you on the list, man. So I think we probably should slide that way. But this is a great conversation. I didn't want to cut it off, But with that being said, you did mention science a couple times. Now for my atheist listeners, hearing Christians talk about science, I think, is going to kind of make their skin crawl or something like that, because in some circles, there's this perception, that Christianity and science are incompatible. So, talk to us a little bit about that. This is one thing that we wanted to get to for sure. What are 2 or 3 points that we can explore that kind of debunks that false perception of there being some sort of inherent discord between science and Christianity?
Absolutely. I think this is probably my favorite thing to talk about. I talk about everything. Obviously, we have to, but like if I just got to pick one lane, and actually at my conference this year, I'm going to do a whole talk on the kind of the scientific aspects. But there are several Pew research studies that indicate that approximately 65% of our young people are walking away from the faith when they get to or through college. And so that is the number that gets me up in the morning. That's the number that makes me do what I do. And that's a segue into this, because it's even more troubling that when asked, the reason that they give most often is it's not about they didn't like the pastor, or it's not about church hurt. The reason is intellectual skepticism.
Okay.
And so they get to college, and then there's a professor that either challenges them or says something they never heard before. And they have not been trained by us, by youth pastors and youth ministers, and by pastors and by parents. They've not been trained how to respond effectively to these different objections. Because, you and I know there's nothing new being brought up. There's no new evidence that we have to, combat or defend. And largely, most of this has already been answered. Go read any of Frank's books, Ravi, William Lane Craig, Craig Keener, a lot of these other people. So
John Lennox, yeah.
John Lennox. That's the other thing. I think we need to do a better job of talking about the fact that there are well-known and well-respected, not just scientists, but people in a lot of higher-up professions that if you want to make an intellectual thing, they're some of the smartest people in the world, and they're firm believers. Arguably the most famous scientist in the country, who's the head of NIH, the National Institute of Health, Francis Collins, he's a passionate Christian. So, and he's obviously one of the most well-respected scientists. So he's one of the 2 or 3 people that helped map the human genome. So I think that's one thing. We need to delve into some of the things that these scientists have brought to the limelight and understand how it does not contradict their faith in Christ. So here's one quick proof. If we think about science as the study of cause and effect, where you're mixing 2 beakers together, and then smoke starts shooting out. I don't know if you wanted smoke to shoot out, but that's
probably not.
Happening.
But okay, yeah.
Probably not. But that's the effect, and so you're trying to figure out, okay, what was the cause? What was the chemical reaction? Sometimes we know the effect we want, and so we know what cause to do. So we know if we mix this and this produces that, and that's what we want. And that's how we get medicines, and that's how we try to get medicines or even different materials or whatever the case is. Cause and effect. Now, nothing can cause itself. So let's say we know for a fact that space, time, and matter exist. If space, time, and matter exist, they must be the effect, because nothing can cause itself. If space, time, and matter are the effect, whatever caused space, time, and matter must itself be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. And who does that sound like?
There we go.
So That's God, and I didn't. You don't. That's why I tell a lot of people you don't necessarily not to demean the Bible. I'm a huge believer in teaching the Word, but we don't need the Word all the time to be able to prove the evidence for God, because it's a logical and philosophical, and in this case, cosmological lane of thinking that we can use to get to that same goal. A lot of people, or some people, may not know about the fine-tuning of the universe, and I think it's probably one of the most powerful arguments for the existence of God, because
Sure.
if you're going to say, for example, the centrifugal force that balances, the gravitational forces allowing everything to orbit the sun, and if the universe would have expanded at a rate 1 millionth more slowly, expansion would never have occurred, and the universe would have collapsed on itself. 1 million faster, then it would have overexpanded, and no galaxies would have formed. If the speed of light was varied, or not the same 299 million, 792,458 meters per second, if that number changes slightly, if it's not accurate, then everything falls apart. The 23-degree axial tilt, the 21% level of oxygen in the atmosphere, we're at 25%, there are spontaneous fires, at 15%, we suffocate. Same thing with carbon dioxide. The 24-hour rotation, like those things are extremely precise. And if they're altered slightly, we can't survive here. Now, those are just a few of the I don't even know how many constants there are.
Oh,
I think
geez.
close to 100 or more maybe. But
Right.
it's not just one of those. If any one of those is altered or varies or changes, it precludes us from having life. Now, there's two options then. You can say it's just coincidence, it just happened that way in the early universe and it just happened to work out.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can say it was specifically designed that way. To me, when something is that intricately designed and precise, it just makes sense that there's a designer behind it. Everything we see in life, that's the truth. Nothing we see in life that is intricately designed was accidental. And we can say, okay, well, something in nature that it just looks beautiful, this or that. Well, that still goes back to the designer, in my estimation. But I think there's another kind of scientific argument embedded in here of the law of non-contradiction. So that says that two opposing truths cannot both be true in the same time and space. So with the creation of the universe, we got two choices: either something came from nothing, or something came from someone. Once again, just off the face of it, which one just sounds more logically? If somebody were able to take their presupposition away, if you're an atheist and you just remove your presupposition and just say in everything else in your life, what have you ever seen or heard of anything coming from nothing? When I say nothing, I mean no thing. Right? Because I watched a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins, and they were on the Bill Maher show and talking about
Goodness.
and they were trying to define nothing, essentially. They didn't say it like that, but they were like, maybe it was a lightning strike, or maybe a meteor hit Earth, but those are things. Those are not nothing.
Right.
So you still haven't answered the question. All you've done is push the envelope one step farther back. And so what we know, and every scientist has now proven, Einstein with the theory of general relativity, Arnold Penzias and Robert Wilson, when they discovered the radiation afterglow in the early universe, all of these things prove that the universe was not eternal. It had a definite beginning. They call it the Big Bang, and I don't really care what we call it, because here's the issue. If there's a definite beginning, then whatever began the beginning had to exist outside of that.
Right.
Like there is no beginning without a beginner, and this is where the major point of contention or confusion is. We have an answer to who or what the beginner was. They still don't. Stephen Hawking went to his death still trying to figure it out. Brilliant man.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but
Right?
yeah, right.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? I'm not knocking him. I mean, he's a brilliant man. There's a lot we can learn from him. But I believe his presupposition to rule out God, it wouldn't allow him to see that was the correct answer. And it doesn't even discount everything else that you figure out after that. That's the kind of the going back to the question of, well, if this was true, would you believe it? You don't lose anything I don't know what it is. People think that they're going to lose, and really, I do. It's submission. People don't want to submit to
at the end of the day
anybody but them. Yeah, they want to be their own God, and so that's fine if you want to make that decision. But just understand you're making a decision in spite of the evidence, not because of it.
Interesting enough. I kind of want to interject something here, right quick. Is that it hadn't really occurred to me, before, but you used the word presupposition, a couple times. Now, broadly speaking, in terms of the way that most apologists engage, I guess this genre of study, they tend to, either fall in the classical approach, you know what I'm saying, or evidentialist approach, maybe probably be more accurate. And that's kind of what you're describing, taking the evidence that is kind of commonly available to any observer, and then drawing logical conclusions from it. And then you have other folks who take the presuppositional approach, and many times there's, I think, unnecessary angst between those two camps, but I just wanted to point out something, that I think maybe sometimes, just kind of for my precept listeners, I think sometimes they may have a tendency to kind of turn off their ears to the arguments from natural theology. But if you really think about it, I think some of the arguments that they may shy away from actually can be used in a presuppositional way. Like, for example, when you talk about the argument from fine tuning. Now when you break it down, there's actually these constants, particularly that as an example, the cosmological constant you mentioned earlier. You have a slew of them. Some have to deal with the weak force and strong force, and if this wasn't that way, then the whole universe wouldn't exist. But at the end of the day, you have these constants and quantities fixed into physical reality that nature itself can't account for. You know what I'm saying? Because these things would have had to been, present at the initial point, the Big Bang, whatever you want to call it. And that suggests then that there's order of some sort that is not, again, it cannot be accounted for by the natural world and the natural sciences. You know what I'm saying? So, how do you get order from, disorder, or order from nothingness, or something like that? I think there's an argument there. Maybe an argument from order, maybe we could call it, what I'm saying, that you can have access to through the fine tuning argument, so for the precept, you don't have to necessarily say, kind of just categorically eschew, I'm saying, evidentialist arguments. I think that there's many times, ways that some of these natural theology arguments can be used in a presuppositional way, and vice versa. I think that the precept arguments can be used many times with somebody who tends to lean towards the evidential side. Like, Frank Turek just wrote a whole book on called "Stealing from God," where he kind of employs that sort of a methodology, in sort of a way, But have you ever tried? Have you ever thought about that? I definitely
agree, and I'll come back to something I said at the beginning where. Oftentimes I have contention, not because I want to, but with other believers. And it comes out of these two different camps often, not all the time, but more than I would like. and like you said, I had a talk, somebody messaged me on Facebook and we were talking, and I think one of the first questions they asked was, "Are you precept or classical?" I'm like, I don't even know you yet.
It's like, hey, what's your name? Can we get a handshake? I mean, yeah.
And it's like, and I know when that's the way the conversation starts, I know where it's going to go. So I said, I'm classical, but I don't really like labels, and I don't. I'm non-denominational. I don't get into different. It doesn't matter at the end of the day if we're believing the same thing, that salvation comes by Christ alone, through faith alone. And so I told this person also, because they told me, well, why? Because they can see from Romans 1, they know there's the night. I was like, I get it. I know that. I know all the scriptures. I get it. But I've helped a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of people come to know God and know better of Him through the method that I do it. And so there's no use knocking me down or anybody who's classical just because it's not the way you would do it or the way you think it should be done. Mm-hmm. If the goal is achieved, then where's the harm? And the goal being to get them to know Christ. So whatever, God can work in more than one way. And
Certainly,
if He's given a certain person a different inclination to be more precept, that's fine. Do you? But the worst thing for the world to see is for them to see us in the body of Christ arguing with each other about minor issues because we just look dysfunctional. And so,
right.
Let's be united on the central goal, which is, like I said, to get them to Christ. And whatever method Christ, God, Holy Spirit chooses to use, let them decide that.
There you go. There you go. You know, so, you know, with that being said, man, I you know, you touched on a couple, you know, scientific proofs, you know, that I think really just kills this notion that somehow we have to be scientifically uninclined, you know, to be a Christian. But I want to get to a more specific claim right quick, you know, that I get all the time, and I would love for you to touch on it when it concerns the Bible itself, right? So not only do we get this accusation, you know, that Christianity, you know, broadly speaking, is anti-science, but, you know, when it comes to like the miracles in the Bible, you know, folks tend to have a problem with that, you know, the miraculous passages. I can't tell you how many times, you know, somebody be like, oh, you know, you believe in talking snakes and whales that, you know, swallow people and blah, 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 blah. You know, they just kind of run down the different, you know, miraculous instances in the Bible and, you know, suggest that that's automatically a strike against the scriptures. You know, how do you approach that question? How do you approach, you know, the Bible, given that it certainly does speak to miraculous events? How do you approach that from kind of debunk that notion that it's anti-science?
Yeah, so by definition, a miracle is a rare occurrence, right? Mm-hmm. So there's kind of this underlying doubt built in based on the fact that, okay, I've never seen a miracle, so I don't believe in them. Well, if everybody saw miracles all the time, they wouldn't be miracles; they would just be life.
Right.
So that's one thing. Now, me personally, because I've experienced miracles and know of others who have, then it's part of it comes through testimony, and people can choose to believe or not believe the testimony. That's up to them. But coming from a different angle, let's say there are 414 what we'll call prophecies, appearances, or foreshadowings of Christ in the Old Testament. You know, prophecies throughout the law, appearances, foreshadowings through the different archetypes and types of Christ that were there. Mathematically speaking, the odds of anyone fulfilling this amount of prophecy are staggering. So I'll just give some quick numbers. The chances of one person fulfilling 8 prophecies is 1 in 100 quadrillion, which is a real number. Wow. It's got 5 commas with the 3 zeros. So that's like a trillion, or I don't even know how to go that high. So that's the chances of that. The chances of one person fulfilling 48 prophecies is 1 chance in 10 to the 157th power. Now, there's a mathematical number called Skewer's number, which is 1 in 10 to the 130th. That's the largest number that mathematicians count to. They don't go like past that. It's statistically not worth counting, basically.
Okay.
So the chances of Jesus fulfilling this amount of prophecies go beyond math's reach.
Wow.
One person fulfilling 300 prophecies, it's only happened once on the planet, and that's only happened with Jesus. Even if we didn't know anything about the scientific evidence or any of that, that fact alone should lead everybody to at least investigate the person of Jesus. Because,
right.
Like, if I tell you, hey, Adam, I know what you're going to wear tomorrow and next week and next year on which day of the week, if I was that specific about certain things, and I was like, I know when your kids are, like, if I told you everything about you and everything happened exactly like I said, you would be like, man, this dude, Alex, is not normal. He's on something else.
He's in the Matrix, obviously.
He's in the Matrix.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one thing. If there's also good evidence that God exists, and he's the same one that set the laws of nature and laws of physics in motion, then he can also suspend them at any time he wants, because he's God. Mm-hmm. So, like, just on the face of it, if God exists, and I think we can get to that from a lot of the scientific evidence that we talked about, and there's more, we didn't really touch the surface. But if he does exist, and he created the laws of nature and the laws of physics and all that, he can suspend them at any time. And to me, the greatest miracle in the Bible is Jesus coming to earth, wrapping himself in human flesh. So we don't really necessarily even we talk about it as the incarnation, obviously, but I don't know, we don't count it in the same realm as the feeding of the 5,000 or walking on water and stuff like that. But that to me, and actually that might be number two beyond actually creating everything. So if God can create the universe and everything that's in it and the way that things work, everything else is easy after that. And I say that as one who cannot do anything like God. But right. I'm just saying, if a God or being could do that, then, you know, why couldn't he walk on water? Why couldn't he do these other things? So that's one way to think about it. And once again, back to the presupposition, most people who don't believe in the Bible, or many people who don't believe in the Bible or believe in Christ or believe in those miracles, they presuppose that supernatural things cannot occur. I remember talking with Jim Warner Wallace, and before he was a Christian, he presupposed that supernatural things, miracles don't occur, they can't occur, they can't exist. What was that based on? Just because I don't think they can. Well, that's not really a very evidentiary approach to it.
Right.
Because you could think wrong about a lot of things. So if there's evidence, though, that even one miracle can occur, then that means those types of things can happen. And so obviously the miracle that everything hinges on is the resurrection, which to me is the most well-attested event in human history, in antiquity. We have early documentation. We have, and this is not religious stuff, this is out of all historical documents, the earliest documents that we have about anything in history are the biblical accounts. So recorded within 15 to 40 years of the events that actually occurred. Most things in antiquity weren't written about until 500 years after the event. When something occurs 500 years before and you try to write about it, you can't interview eyewitnesses like Luke talks about. You can't, as Paul talks about, as I write this, some of them are still awake, that they know that what I'm saying is true. Like, you can't say those things when it's 500 years, 1,000 years later. Right. So it's obvious that something happened. And if you take the resurrection away, let's say that you say that didn't happen, then you still have to account for what made Saul go from Saul to Paul, what would make him suddenly believe in something that there was no evidence for immediately, what would make the half-brothers of Jesus, James and Jude, suddenly want to stop making fun of their brother and all of a sudden believe in him, and not just believe in him, but be willing to die for preaching his message. You still have to explain those things. I think sometimes people will say, well, I don't believe in miracles, and they think that's the end of the story. Well, no, because we have 10 known non-biblical authors who write about this guy named Jesus within 100 years of his life, 150 years. So something did happen. He did live. He did do something. Now, we can debate about those things, but what we can't debate is that there was people willing to go to their death. Not just the disciples, hundreds of people from Jerusalem to Rome, to India, to Africa, willing to go to their death because of what? And most of them were dying and being persecuted before any of the New Testament documents were ever written. So now you have to also account for this fact. Most faith, most religion, the text creates the followers, right? The Quran creates Muslims, the Vedas create Hindus, the Buddhist texts create Buddhists. So, Book of Mormon creates Mormons. Well, how do you explain thousands of people believing in Jesus as God and worshiping him as such and teaching about him and being willing to die for that belief without any text? There had to be some event. There had to be some event that was so amazing and so revelatory that they were like, "Yo, I'm done. This is it. He's the one." There had to be some, and like I said, if you don't believe that event is the resurrection, you still have to answer the question because something did happen. So it's not a way out of it when people say, "I don't believe in miracles," because there's too much evidence. Obviously, we're still here 2,000 years later talking about Christ. So something did happen, and it has sustained. So those who don't believe in miracles, then you have to come up with another, better explanation for why Christianity even exists at all.
Yeah, and that's such a crucial point that you made there at the end, because, I believe, in the resurrection, because, I've read the scriptures and I've got a number of reasons to believe it, the kind of evidences that you're talking about. But when you're looking at the disciples, the original, disciples, Peter and all those guys, they weren't believing that Jesus rose from the grave based upon secondhand information. You know what I'm saying? It's not, like a lot of people, they die for what they believe. You know what I'm saying? But these folks, the original disciples, they're putting their lives on the line for what they believe to have seen. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't something that they heard. Like, no, we saw, a risen Jesus, you know what I'm saying? And, the empty tomb, the whole nine, you know what I'm saying? And that's such a crucial nuance that I think a lot of people miss, and I really, matter of fact, for anybody interested, you can definitely check out the Case for the Resurrection, written by Mike Licona and Gary Habermas, where they kind of go into these, kind of evidences, you know what I'm saying? And actually, I want to double back too, and something you were talking about science, or just more specifically with miracles. I think people, you can kind of give me your insight on this, but I think people have a misunderstanding about the laws of nature. They feel like the laws of nature are like some sort of force out there that prevents unnatural things from happening, when really the laws of nature, scientifically speaking, are just descriptions of regularities. You know what I'm saying? They're descriptions of things that regularly happen in nature and will probably continue to happen. As a matter of fact, for my philosophy heads out there, David Hume, I think he wrote a paper umpteen eons ago, whatever, about the problem of induction. You know what I'm saying? We just talk about this, the nature of science. I mean, scientists can speak to what will probably happen, but you don't have certainty there. But you can't really say, this can or cannot happen. You know what I'm saying? They can only speak to regularities and what will probably happen. You kind of track, you agree with me there, or?
Yes, that's good. That's a good point. I'm gonna use that because it's such a good point, because think about gravity, and so people will say, well, I don't believe in miracles, nothing can violate the laws of nature. But whenever somebody jumps, they have just violated the law of gravity, at least temporarily.
Sure.
So if we can, as humans, as finite creatures, temporarily violate such a law, we fly in airplanes, we do things, we find ways around those laws. So why would we assume that God could not do that to a much greater degree?
Sure.
Like you said, it's just as simply. I mean, before people knew what gravity was, they were still being bound by it, but they didn't. But it wasn't contingent on them being able to define what gravity was.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and like I said, the law, and these laws, again, it's not like at least gravity itself is a force. You know what I'm saying? There's a force that we don't completely understand, but when people talk about the law of gravity is really just a mathematical equation that describes how that force works, or maybe, they can put it into words and describe how, that force called gravity works. But these laws of nature, they're not like some sort of, I don't know, I guess maybe force is probably the best word. There's not some sort of force, that's prohibiting God, you know what I'm saying, or some supernatural being of some sort from intervening in the world, But I definitely want to move on to this last question, because, we're coming up on our time, and I don't want to miss this point. So I definitely want to get this in, because this is something I think I heard you talk about on one of those talks that you have on Saturday morning. But in terms of the authenticity of the Bible, I feel like that kind of piggybacks on our previous question about miracles. Some people, maybe they don't attack the Bible in regards to miracles specifically, but, they just, give the Bible in general the side eye. So can you give our listeners maybe one or 2 points that kind of, what are some reasons that we can hold to Scripture, as being authentic?
Yeah, this is such a big question. I'll just give a couple quick points, and if anybody is listening, trust me, come to the conference. We're going to go into detail about this. I got a guy who I don't know if he's fluent, but he has studied Greek and Hebrew, speaks it. He's going to give us some great insight in this lane. So let me start there. That the amount of documents that we have probably 5,800 Greek manuscripts, and about 9,000 or more, actually, at this point, Syriac, Coptic, Latin, and Arabic. That's close to 15,000. I believe the total number currently is about 20,000, around there. The next closest, number 2 on that list, is 643 manuscripts with Homer's Iliad. So why is that important? Because something, when it's copied that many times, we can compare all of those and see where there was a typo. Obviously, there was no typewriter, but if there's missing an A, we can see that. And it actually gives more validity, because now we can see what the original message actually was, and that's how we can trust the authenticity of what we have now as the Bible. So that's number one on the list is the Bible, and this is all historical documents. I'm not talking about just religious texts. There are, I think, was it Plato or Aristotle? We have 0 manuscripts. I can't remember which one. And nobody ever doubts.
Actually, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah.
It's whatever the junior one is, whoever the one got taught by the other one. Mm-hmm. But I mean the senior one. So but nobody in class doubts the teacher when they say Aristotle or Plato said this or did this, because the stakes aren't high enough. Like Abdu Murray said, the answers are not hard to find, the answers are hard to accept. If we do a little bit of research, anybody, you can see that even skeptics like Bart Ehrman, he says, like, y'all need to stop this. I mean, and he says this as a skeptic, as a New Testament scholar. He gives kudos to his mentor Bruce Metzger, another well-known textual critic who is a believer. Oh, yeah. And so, people who are really going to engage in true scholarship, they don't dismiss the Bible based on its authenticity or anything like that. It has passed those tests time and time again. Like I said, I don't have time to go into all the details, but let's think about this. There's also, like I said, 10 known non-Christian authors who write about Jesus within the 150 years of his life. Guys like Josephus and Tacitus and all these other people, Pliny the Younger. So why are non-Christians writing about this guy, saying things like he was crucified on the eve of Jewish Passover, darkness and an earthquake occurred when he died, his disciples believed he rose from the dead, Christianity spread all the way to Rome, his disciples were willing to deny the Roman gods and worship Jesus as God? Like, they say this stuff as non-believing writers, and they say it within 100 years of Jesus. So for anybody who's really going to challenge the Bible on that you just got to do some research, because it won't pass the test. So those are the evidential reasons we can trust the scriptures. It's early testimony, it's eyewitness testimony, oftentimes it's embarrassing testimony. When they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, those matched up to a degree of 99.5% accuracy, and that was buried in, it was found in 1947, buried for thousands of years. They found 600 documents, most of them Old Testament. So, like, there's no way somebody could have forged that, you know?
Right.
And so that argument is largely been debunked. The issue is not really the trustworthiness of the text, at least not if you want to do some real scholarship. The issue is, do I want to align with Jesus or not?
There it is. And actually, I want to give my man Tim Stratton a shout out again, because he has a lecture. Y'all can check it out on YouTube on I guess it's Free Thinking Ministries on YouTube, or you can just search for Tim Stratton. And he actually has a lecture on connecting the resurrection, evidence for the resurrection that you talked about earlier, and kind of how you can parlay that into evidence actually for the scriptures. You know, I don't want to ruin the argument here, but it's basically if Jesus rose from the dead and affirmed the Old Testament and appointed the New Testament writers and so forth. Or basically establish a New Testament church, and you have some justification there for affirming the scriptures. So y'all definitely check that out. And I would imagine this is probably the kind of stuff that you cover in your book as well, the blueprint for Bible basics. So, maybe as we close out, you can tell us a little bit about that, and certainly touch on the proof for the Truth Conference as well. Okay. Yeah. So the book, The Blueprint for Bible Basics, I wrote it out of my time in youth ministry, because we saw some inconsistencies with the kids. They're going to get saved every week because they messed up the week before. So my youth pastor, who's the same guy I just planted the church with, he asked me to write something to address that, and I said, let me address all the basics. So that turned into something called the Foundation Class, a 6-week class we took the kids through, and then that turned into the book. And the book is actually a stripped-down version of that class, so I need to do a part 2. But there it is. Basically, it has some apologetics in it, but this is actually written before I really got into apologetics, so there's not a whole lot of that in there. But it really deals with the basics of who is Jesus, why do I need to know who he is, what is salvation, how do I get it, what is prayer, all the basics of the faith. No kind of doctrinal issues or anything like that. And not just for youth, but I've had a lot of new believers buy it as well, adults and otherwise, just because it's very foundational. And it's a short book. It has a study guide in it. And, yeah. Dope, man. Dope. Yeah, tell us about that Proof for the Truth Conference, man. Definitely want people to check that out for sure.
All right, so the Proof for the Truth Conference is my second year doing it. It's wearing me out, but I'm happy to do it. And this year's gonna be bigger and better. For those that have heard of Dr. Eric Mason, he's one of my speakers I'm bringing in. He's gonna do an awesome talk, and for those that have been following him, you know he deals a lot with the conscious community and how to kind of debunk some of that ideology or theology. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be having workshops this year where we didn't last year. It's a day and a half, so a little bit longer. There's going to be more time to engage individually with the different apologists there. Like I said, I got people. We're going to have a workshop on kind of the case for Christ. Essentially, why do we have the evidence, or what evidence do we have to really believe this resurrection occurrence? We have another guest speaker I have coming in, a young lady out of California. And there's a movement, I don't know if I'll call it a movement, but there's this new thing popping up of, is God a woman? She's going to delve. You heard of that? Yeah. So
just fairly recently, I've actually been confronted with that a couple of times. It's like a thing now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So she's going to delve into that. So definitely come check it out, because she's going to delve into that. She's also going to delve into some of the cultural issues that we see today and how that plays a role in people's ideologies or theologies. And we're going to do a lot of Q&A time. I have a whole open forum on that first night. So the first night is just Friday evening, and then all day Saturday, May 3rd and 4th. Go to proofforthetruth.org to register and find out information. There'll be updates coming, and much more discussion on science, morality, meaning, and all those other things as well. And let me say this last thing. If you're not a believer in Jesus, if you're a skeptic, or you're any other religion, any other worldview, please come. We're not coming to try to attack anybody. We want to engage with you respectfully, and we want to really kind of come to an agreement on, okay, this is what we do agree on, this is what we don't, what is true, how do we determine what's true, and then hopefully we can find opportunities to grow in that truth.
That's excellent, man. Excellent, man. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you coming on the show. For everybody out there listening, man, you know how we get down on True ID. Check us out on YouTube, True ID page, Facebook. You can hit me up on there, Adam Coleman. Also, we have the Facebook page for True ID Podcast. Twitter, hit me up on there, Twitter /ScottLane7. And, definitely, check us out on iTunes, man. Give us 5 stars, some, likes or whatever they do on iTunes. And I'll tell people about what we're doing here. So with that being said, man, it's another episode in the books. Love y'all, man. Peace.